Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Game Center Live, the variety live-streamed talk show from the NYU Game Center. It's Tuesday, October 3rd, and we've got a great show planned for you today. Those are events. We've got a great show planned for you today. These are actually going to be swapped around, so what you're seeing on the screen is incorrect. First, we will be hearing from current MFA Biagi about what it takes to become a Pokémon master in conversation with Game Center alum and adjunct instructor Flan Falacci. Afterward, it's once again time for the Discourse. In today's show, Naomi Clark is joined by recent addition to the Game Center faculty, Ramiro Corbetta. They're here to dish out the expected fare of game industry news and scorching hot takes regarding, among other things, the aftermath of last show's Unity discussion. All of that is coming up soon, but first, some news. Playtest Thursday is happening every Thursday this fall, 2023, from 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Come down to the NYU Game Center with your work-in-progress game and get feedback from fellow game makers. No game is too early in development for Playtest Thursday, and all types of games are welcome. Non-NYU guests are welcome to attend. To do so, please fill out the form linked in chat. We have a new event to announce. Next Thursday, October 12th at 7 p.m., join us for a book launch talk with none other than Frank Lance, the founding chair of the NYU Game Center, an original co-host of the Discourse. Frank will be returning to the Game Center to talk about his new book, The Beauty of Games, which is an exploration of games as an aesthetic form and touches on many themes that are central to the overall Game Center project. You can RSVP to this talk right now using the link in chat. Save the date for No Quarter 2023 on Friday, November 17th from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. The NYU Game Center will be hosting the 12th incarnation of No Quarter. No Quarter is an annual playable exhibition where 4 newly commissioned works from leading artists working across games are debuted. The full lineup of No Quarter artists will be revealed soon, but in the meantime, you can RSVP using the event link in chat. To answer your question, will it be recorded? Yes, Frank's book talk will be recorded. Go back to that slide. Frank's talk will be recorded, and it will likely be live streamed, but if you can make it in person, we highly encourage that you come in person and see the event. Okay. So this is normally when I would say without further ado, we're going to get started with the show, but we ran into a little bit of a scheduling mishap. So right off the top here, we're just going to ask you all to sit tight and get ready for our first segment. Bear with us while we get set up. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and to start off the segment, Flan is going to chat with us all about Pokemon. Take it away, Flan.
Hey everybody, yeah, so we have a little bit of time before Biagi gets here to talk about the actual current meta, but until then we can chat about Pokemon in general and, just what's been going on and perhaps what I know about it. I believe Logan maybe has some memes from Twitter to pull up that we can talk about. So let's see.
I'm trying.
See what we got here.
I'm trying to find them. I may need a moment. I closed Twitter when I couldn't find them. But
all right, we'll give him a moment to get the tweet back.
What's your favorite Pokemon?
My favorite Pokemon. So Carl is asking what my favorite Pokemon is. It's tough to pick just one, but if I had to say, it would definitely be Slowpoke and the whole Slowpoke evolution line. I just like how like dopey they are and how cute they are. It's very good. And I like Psychic type Pokemon in general. So they fall within that. I also like Espeon a lot. Espeon's just very cool. I feel like picking an evolution as your favorite is like pretty classic, but it's also it is. They're just all really good designs. Mewtwo and Mew also are extremely cool. As far as legendaries go, again, these are all psychic types, so you can see my preference like pretty clearly. I will say I have been so I'm not currently like playing like competitive Pokemon video game, but I did just get into the Pokemon TCG, which is not what we're going to talk about today. But while we have this time, I might as well talk about the Pokemon TCG, which has a pretty alive scene in New York City right now. There's several meetups every week at different card stores where you can go participate in tournaments and get actual league points. If you get enough league points, theoretically, you can go to things like regionals and finals and stuff like that. But a lot of them are also just pretty casual and fun. I went without a deck one time, and someone let me play against them with one of their own decks. So there is just like kind of a nice community and spirit for that. I had never gotten into the Pokemon TCG like before. I was always a video game player, so it's fun to like actually delve into it now. I'd played Magic before, so I had that kind of like TCG deck building knowledge, but I think I'm getting deeper into Pokemon TCG than I ever got into Magic, which is fun.
I can't find the meme that I saw the other day.
That is okay.
But I thought it would be a fun idea. I know enough about competitive Pokemon and the different ratings that each of the Pokemon have, so I thought it would be fun to go on to Smogon.
Oh, yeah. Let's look at Smogon.
And discuss maybe people's favorite Pokemon and see if they are overused, underused, etc.
I have a feeling that any Slowpoke evolution line is underused, or like less, the lower tiers than that. I know it gets lower.
Ready? Okay, scratch all of that because our guest is here. Please welcome to the stream, Biagi.
Hey.
I'm so sorry.
No worries. We have, is it Biagi?
Biagi.
Biagi. So we have Biagi here to talk about the current Pokemon competitive meta. I said it a second ago, but my background with Pokemon is basically I am aware of the competitive scene. I'm not currently, sorry, my mic is like tilting a little bit. I'm not currently up to date on like actually having competitive Pokemon and playing with them. Though I did back in the X and Y generation kind of do that with the IV breeding and EV training. But it's still something that I try to keep up with. So I watched like the World Championships this year and regionals. Yeah. So I'd love to hear your knowledge about the current scene and just what Pokemon are relevant and what you think. Yeah.
Okay, for sure. I brought my laptop so we can kind of do a little bit of team building. It'll be fun.
Nice.
A new regulation just started like 2 days ago, and Pokemon Company was being very tight-lipped about like what was legal. So there's not really a super defined meta right now, which is kind of fun because you can kind of do like whatever you want.
So we got for those who can't see on stream, there's some Pokemon stickers on the outside of the laptop.
So yeah, the Pokemon love runs deep. Okay. Plugging it in. Okay.
Oh yeah, so we've got Pokemon Showdown up here. Does anyone in chat play Pokemon Showdown?
Okay. So these are a lot of teams. It's kind of a badge of honor to have the more untitled and then the number after it among the community. Mine is kind of weak sauce because if you clear your cookies, your teams get deleted,
Ooh.
which is fun. So Regulation E is the current meta. And so right now, the biggest thing was the DLC just came out. So like Ogerpon is kind of a crazy Pokemon because usually, especially in recent times, Pokemon has been designing Pokemon with like specific gimmicks. But Ogerpon has kind of like 4 gimmicks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he's like, he's kind of an interesting guy. Or she, I guess. I think they're like gender locked to female.
Oh, nice. Are they legendary or like pseudo legendaries?
I think they're technically a legendary.
Oh, cool.
But they're tournament legal, so maybe that makes them like pseudo. But I know you can't breed them. So they kind of have like mid-range stats, but really obviously pretty solid attack and pretty solid speed stat. And generally, Pokemon kind of, again, it's sort of like a different design trend. Like earlier Pokemon kind of have more balanced stats, where like newer Pokemon seem to usually have like a really strong 2-stat combo.
Yeah.
Where like if you look at like an older Pokemon, like Dragonite might be a good example. He's Generation 1. I can't remember his spread super well, but when you look at it, you have a really strong attack, but you kind of have like a really balanced everything else, which is kind of just like an interesting way that Pokemon has changed how they design things. The really good website for checking things is Victory Road. I don't think there's been any events in this current format, so like this is not the best place to check for it. But we can build something around Ogerpon because he's kind of new and good right now.
Nice. And so Ogerpon is one of the DLC Pokemon, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
He's kind of like, or she. She's like the main Pokemon you're kind of going after. And so I think her thing is that she has these masks. She has like the Cornerstone mask, the Hearthflame mask, and and the Wellspring mask, which basically just changes her from a pure grass type to a stone grass type, a fire grass type, or a water grass type. I think right now
that is several gimmicks. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then on top of that, so Terra is the excuse me. The Terra is like the new big thing this generation as well, the new gimmick. And so you can't change Ogerpon's Terra type, but any other Pokemon you could be able to change it to any of the 18 types. Which, when we do a battle, I can kind of explain Terra a little bit more. But Ogerpon is locked in, which is
yeah, that is, because I feel like one of the big things of this generation is like that you don't know what Terra type is going to come out necessarily on a Pokemon because it can be anything. So it's interesting to have a Pokemon where the Terra type is locked. And yeah, for those on the stream who don't know about Terra types, basically the new mechanic is that each Pokemon has like a secondary hidden type that can be brought out with a special choice. Of course, you can only do this to one of your Pokemon per battle, so it becomes strategic about when you want to do it, if you want to do it, and how you respond to the other player's Terra type. But yeah.
That was a really good definition.
Thanks. Also, another quick thing, Pokemon Showdown, for those who don't know, is a site where you can just quickly build teams without having to actually train the Pokemon. Imagine like a Pokemon Stadium or Pokemon Coliseum, but with like every Pokemon that has ever existed and every item and every moveset that is possible. So yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely recommend going on there and playing random battles to just get a start. I love doing that.
It's so much fun. It's so great. The other website, I guess, also, if we were just in terms of resources, is I think it's called like, it has like a really weird name because it's made by this guy. You might know about it. It's just this Pokemon damage calculator website.
Oh wow! Look at all those numbers.
Yeah, which is like incomprehensible, but basically, just to break it down, is you can put in all the stats of your Pokemon here, and then the Pokemon they would be going up against here, and then it'll tell you basically the damage roll for what your attacks, because Pokemon has like a really quirky way of calculating damage where it's like a little bit different every time. So you can kind of, generally people EV for very specific calcs when you're doing like, if you're going in for like a regional or something. And generally people have like maybe 10 or 12 calcs in their team that they've like specifically calc for, and those kind of cover for a lot of things. It's like the elegant calc is like if it can calc for like 5 things without only having to memorize one. Which is a big thing with like a new format too, because like I'm
right, because you don't always know like what other people are going to be rolling with in the tournament. Yeah. So I know some of like the really big Pokemon in the meta right now. Obviously, Fluttermane has like an insane use percentage.
Yep.
Are there any other Pokemon that have had a use percentage that high recently? The like 70%?
So Amoonguss is.
Oh yeah,
I
Amoonguss
don't-
is crazy.
I think Amoonguss was like in the 50s because Amoonguss is just a great. I think it's gone down a little bit because now it's competing as like a grass type on teams. But Amoonguss is just a super utility Pokemon. It can redirect attacks, which is super useful. It can put Pokemon to sleep, which is kind of like the most broken status effect other than like freeze in Pokemon.
Yeah,
'cause it just shuts them down.
Spore is like, is it 100% accurate? Wow, yeah. So
Yeah.
100% accurate move that puts a Pokemon to sleep is like a huge deal.
Yeah, and sleep, I guess, is like. I think the first turn is guaranteed that they're not going to be able to attack or do anything. The second turn, there's like, I think it's like a 1 in 3 roll or something, and then it gets increasingly, and then I think after like 3 turns, it's guaranteed to wake up. But it's like a crazy way of introducing like a ton of RNG into a game that like can really change the tides a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of Amoonguss on teams. And some pretty like interesting Terra types with Amoonguss too, because it's such a like defensive Pokemon. That I think that's also another interesting thing about the Terra type mechanic is that there's like offensive Terra typing and like defensive Terra typing, where a lot of the time the Terra type is actually there just to like reduce the amount of damage that a Pokemon would be taking.
Yeah.
When it really, like, if you're just kind of starting the game, it feels like, okay, like, I just boost my stab, because I think you get, like, a big boost for terrestrializing, but then it's also, like, a lot of the times it's used as kind of a shield play as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really interesting because I remember when, like the month before Scarlet and Violet came out, a lot of, like, the community was, like, arguing on Twitter about, like, how broken terrestrialization was going to be as, like, an offensive mechanic, but now I think almost, I would say like the majority of Terra that happens now is mostly like defensive because it's just so useful, especially for like a Pokemon like Amoonguss, where like the longer it stays on the field, the higher your chance of winning, basically.
Yeah.
And so it's just a crazy. It's kind of, I think it's one of the coolest mechanics Pokemon has introduced, just because it shakes up. Because I mean, it's just so type dependent, so like it shakes up the formula in such an interesting way.
Yeah, it really does. It adds like another layer of complexity onto a game that's already like extremely complex, which I think is what makes the competitive scene so rich. So we have 3 Pokemon on this team right now. We've got a Fluttermane, an Ogerpon, and an Amoonguss.
Yes.
What do you think would be good to balance this out?
So right now, I feel like we probably should pick between Amoonguss or
These two,
Ogerpon,
because they're both grass type.
Yeah.
Well, what would you, in the current sphere, since Ogerpon is so new, what do you think you would keep?
I think, well, so we could change Ogerpon's type and keep Amoonguss, but I think they kind of have bad synergy just because Ogerpon really wants to go fast and do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
So I think I've seen a lot of Ogerpon on like hyper offensive teams. That's at least like the niche that people have found for him or for them right now.
Yeah.
And so I think we lose Amoonguss, and then the other Pokemon you were asking about, like percentage usage, is Iron Hands. Which Iron Hands is just an oppressive Pokemon because it's like kind of like the big stick Pokemon right now, where it just has I mean, its stat spread is just insane, which sounds crazy coming out of, if you don't know anything about Pokemon, it's like, oh, this guy's stats are crazy. But the 140 attack stat is just outrageous.
Yeah, and the huge HP as well. Also, another note, so these Pokemon with very interesting names, Iron Hands and Fluttermane, they are that way because they're paradox Pokemon. So like in the lore of the games, they come from like past and future sort of realities, Iron Hands being like one of these future ones, and Fluttermane being like a prehistoric sort of Pokemon.
Yeah.
So not all the Pokemon in the new gen have weird like sort of 2-word names like this. These ones are just kind of like peculiar.
Yeah, and I don't know if you were, but I was really disappointed by the future Pokemon because they all have iron in front of them.
Yeah, they all have iron, and then all the past ones have like different stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weird naming convention. So right now we have like a really solid kind of like versatile damage doer. We have Fluttermane, which is just kind of like at this point essential because Fluttermane is, again, like the stats of Fluttermane are just, you can see it's just like another big stick Pokemon.
And that Ghost Fairy dual type is really good too.
Yeah. And then I remember Iron Hands, a lot of people thought was going to be good because fighting electric isn't like a super great typing, especially when Fluttermane Fairy is super effective on fighting, so just like kind of oppressive, but that didn't stop it. It's really good Pokemon.
And Iron Hands is a fake out user too, right?
Yeah. So
do you see like most Iron Hands competitively having fake out on them, or is it just kind of one of the options for a build?
I think it's kind of like, I would say it's probably like the most prevalent right now, or at least in the previous format, it was super used just because fake out for anyone who doesn't know, fake out is it's a priority move, so it's going to go first, and it allows you to flinch your opponent's Pokemon, which just means they don't get to attack for that turn. So you can kind of just use Iron Hands to stop an attack, and then oftentimes you pair it with Fluttermane, who can just do a horrible amount of damage.
Yeah. Yeah, Fluttermane's coming in with like Moonblast, which is like a huge fairy type damaging attack, and it hits both of the slots. Oh, that's another thing I should mention is in the competitive Pokemon, all battles are double battles. So that means there's 4 Pokemon out on the field, 2 for each trainer. So really trying to think about, there's just like a lot more to think about. So like moves that damage both Pokemon are hugely valuable. Moves that buy you a turn. Protect is like more relevant. So yeah, I think it's interesting that they have that format competitively. It makes sense. But it's also kind of funny that in the main game, like you almost never double battle.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think it's mostly because I think double battles are sort of like the most interesting way to play with Pokemon and its mechanics. I think singles obviously has like a really huge competitive scene that I don't personally know a ton about, but I think that it's like it's almost, when you watch the 2 games play out, they're like, it's like 2 completely different games, which is really interesting.
No, it definitely is. And yeah, I guess most of the random battles I did on Pokemon Showdown were single battles, but I'm like, wait, I should have been practicing double battles. That's like the main format. But I guess there is a competitive scene for single battles as well.
Yeah, it's not like officially sanctioned by Nintendo or Game Freak or anyone.
I see, yeah.
But it's like, I think it's like the main community format, because I think a lot of people who grew up playing the RPGs feel very good.
Yeah, and watching the TV shows too.
Yeah.
Like it is like the forefront of like how they present it, and then there's just the whole competitive, like the whole like sanctioned competitive scene is double.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you watch the World Championships this year?
I did. They're really great. The person who came in second place, Michael, is he's German, but I've sort of got to know him like through the community. He's a really nice guy, and his team was really interesting because it was like there was a really prevalent team at the time was these either hyper offense with like extreme speed Dragonite and like Chen-Pao. And so Chen-Pao has the ability to lower your opponent's defenses just by like existing, and then Dragonite is just like a really oppressive physical attacker that has access to extreme speed, which is very strong priority attack that can go first. And so it was kind of dominating the meta where you could just send those 2 out and they could your opponent wouldn't get to play the game. And so there's this Pokemon that came out this generation called I think it's called like Ferrograph.
Oh yeah, this is an evolution that was added for Giraffig, I think is how it's pronounced.
Yeah. And it has the ability Armor Tail, which is it just basically prevents priority moves. And
That's
then
pretty strong, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then it can also set up Trick Room. So he had this really interesting strategy of like setting up Trick Room and then denying pretty much one of the most powerful cores in the format at the time.
Yeah.
Which took him all the way to second place in the Worlds. But then the player that won is just their play was just phenomenal. The stream was just so good at the game. It's kind of crazy. And
with a team with a lot of less traditional picks, right? The like Hisuian Arcanine and Sylveon were on there, which are not like on a lot of lists of like what are the meta Pokemon right now. You don't really see those Pokemon. But I think that's one of the things that's so cool about this game is that it's so complex that like you can get creative with the meta and still become the world champion. Oh yeah, so Shohei Kimura is the current champion. And then so yeah, he has some, I guess, oh yeah, so this is maybe a different team than the one I saw. Because I do remember seeing the Hisuian Arcanine Sylveon editions.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is Fluttermane, Urshifu, Amoonguss, Iron Hands, Chen-Pao, and Landorus.
Yeah, so I think this is generally what's considered like a good stuffs team, where you just have like a lot of very powerful Pokemon kind of, and then you have, in the hands of like a really strong player, it kind of just, you don't need as much like specific like core synergy because you have so many tools kind of to work with. Where I think Michael's team is a lot closer to like sort of like a very specific like archetype of like Trick Room, and then like just like hyper offense like damage dealers. Big fan of Trick Room. I love the
yeah, Trick Room's crazy.
So this is, I guess, good just to kind of demonstrate you see obviously like which Pokemon are really good. Urshifu was really oppressive.
It's in like every team here. Iron Hand's also showing up a lot. Fluttermane obviously showing up a lot here.
Yeah. Which I think is really interesting because I think it kind of, when you have really earlier formats, like earlier last year, or maybe this year, I don't remember, but had like fewer legendary and fewer like really strong Pokemon. I think that's happens kind of, I think Pokemon does it on purpose where like as we get towards the World Championships, they kind of start letting loose a lot more of the more powerful Pokemon, which centralizes the meta in like this way, where you look at tournament results from like earlier on, previous formats where they're only allowing like no paradox Pokemon, no legendaries, and you end up having like much more diversity in the teams because people can get a lot weirder with it.
Yeah. That was something I noticed too. Between regionals and world, a ton of new Pokemon were added to the format, and so like, what is that like for players to have to react that quickly before something as important as the World Championships, like when the game completely changes? People
were mad. People were really upset. People were really upset. There was a lot of like Twitter talk and YouTube videos of like all this drama of like people being really upset about it, especially because it wasn't just like they added like some new Pokemon. They added like Urshifu and Cresselia and Landorus, which are like, I mean, I think Landorus has been on like 2 or 3 World Championship winning teams at this point.
Wow.
Like they're pretty oppressive Pokemon. I think Urshifu, the only reason Urshifu hasn't, I think, was because of COVID, and like pretty much all the Sword and Shield stuff they didn't do World Championships for it.
Oh, interesting.
But yes, this was Urshifu's like first World Championship, but like I think it would have been like a 3 or 4 time World Championship Pokemon if not for that.
Another kind of interesting thing that was in the news from that, and I guess we'll start to wrap up. But I heard that some players were DQ'd for like having hacked Pokemon, but that there was some controversy around this. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest thing, a lot of people gen their Pokemon, and I think there's a kind of a divide between calling them like hacked Pokemon or gen Pokemon.
Yeah.
Because hacked kind of implies that they're like cheating, but like what genning is just like skipping all like the grinding in game that you have to do to make a Pokemon. So there's like a lot of, I don't know, I feel like it's like kind of like empty controversy that people just like to kind of stir up every once in a while about like how if you gen a Pokemon, you're not like, it's not real and you're cheating or whatever, and you're like saving like 5 hours of your life by genning your team kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so there's like some argument about like a disparity, but then there's also an argument of like if you work a job and you like are a full-time student or something and you're trying to build like a competitive Pokemon team, you might not have 5 hours to do it. So I think what happened was, I think Pokemon Company actually was pretty upfront about it. They sent like an email out saying that they were going to be really strict about hack checks, and they came up with like kind of like a novel way of getting people. Of like it was like I think a lot of people were upset too because it was like a gotcha kind of vibe, because it was like a lot of people, there's like people hack at like gen at regionals and stuff like that, and it's usually flies under the radar fine. But then at Worlds, they did this thing where they were checking if you had like specific home tags on your Pokemon, which meant if you had like a Pokemon like Landorus Therian also is like crazy, you can't catch it in the current games. You have to own like 2 other games to get most of these Pokemon.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have the proper tags from those games, and that was how they were catching people. And so a lot of people that thought they went in pretty confident that their hack team was fine. It was not.
And then got DQ'd. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that Nintendo and Game Freak are kind of coming down on the side of like, even if these Pokemon are like legal, like they're not breaking the rules, like stats wise, we're gonna just kind of enforce the fact that you have to get them in the legitimate way, and that usually involves purchasing other video games. So I don't know, I think it's just kind of interesting. Maybe you can tell what my stance is from that. So I guess we have a couple minutes left. We didn't get to building out a full team here, but is there anything else you want to get in before we wrap up?
I think I can kind of show off a team that I was cooking on like last night. So I think this actually is a team. I think I stole some of this from like an online tournament that was like last week. But it's sort of an interesting. So Tornadus is like really important for like the hyper offense archetype nowadays, because Prankster gives it like priority to its non-damaging moves.
Yeah, and one of those being Tailwind, which is really important.
Yes, absolutely. And so Tailwind allows it basically doubles the speed stat of all the Pokemon on your team for 4 turns. So kind of the idea is that you get Tornadus out, you get the Tailwind off, and then you just try and kill everything as fast as possible before your Tailwind runs out. And then you have like some backups, like you have a defensive mode through like Landorus and Amoonguss, if you can kind of like, especially because there's like teams that are specifically, especially Trick Room teams that are specifically designed to counter hyper offense like Tailwind stuff.
Yeah. And
then Amoonguss is really good against Tailwind or against Trick Room teams because he's very slow and he can put things to sleep, especially under Trick Room. He goes first. Trick Room, for those who don't know, is an attack that basically, because the way that priority is decided in Pokemon, if it's not a priority move, it's whichever Pokemon has the highest speed stat. So if someone uses Trick Room, then it flips, and whoever has the lowest speed stat goes first. And Amoonguss is a very slow Pokemon, so once Trick Room goes off, it's able to just put everything to sleep, which is cool.
So seeing someone in chat saying there was a competitor that had a Cresselia that they added since Gen 5. They didn't know it was hacked, and then they found out when it got DQ'd. That's really rough.
Yeah, I think I heard about that, and it's wild that was... It's just crazy that... Because there's just no way for anyone to know that. And I think
Yeah.
I think that was also a lot of the controversies that like people there's so many hacked Pokemon now when you go on like global trade or whatever, like you trade online that like, or especially if you're like trading on Reddit or like what a lot of people do, there's just no way for a normal person to know whether or not a Pokemon is hacked unless you have like a bunch like kind of like archaic software like on your computer that where you can like upload your save and then like physically check if like there's like RNG manipulation or like what happened. So I think it's like examples like that that are kind of like really lame.
Yeah,
You know?
definitely. Cool. Yeah. Well, I think it's time to wrap up. But yeah, thanks so much for coming on and talking about Pokemon. Hopefully we can do another segment like this perhaps. Maybe even a segment about the TCG at some point. But yeah, cool. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much to Biagi and Flan for that segment. I learned a lot. We heard a lot of terms. We heard a lot of Pokemon names. And I want to give a special shout out to our live captioner who probably heard a lot of these Pokemon names for the first time. They are impossible to spell just knowing them. Yeah, huge shout out to them. Thank you so much for all of your hard work. And thanks again to Biagi and Flan. We're going to get set up for our second segment of today's show, which is The Discourse with Naomi Clark and Ramiro Corbetta. Bear with us while we get set up. We'll be right back. All right, we are set up and ready to go for The Discourse. Without further ado, take it away, Naomi and Ramiro.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Discourse. I have with me today one of the newest members of our faculty, Ramiro Corbetta.
Hey, everyone. Hello.
Proud. Ramiro has just started this fall as a newest professor full-time in the department, sits next door to me.
Yeah.
So
if we speak loudly, we can hear each other.
yeah, sure. We're going to overhear each other's conversations. So I thought we should have Ramiro on and talk about all the goings-on from the last 2 weeks. It's been a weird news cycle. It's kind of been dominated by lots of labor issues and problems with companies that make platforms for making games. So yeah, let's dive right into the Unity news. So the New York Times finally took note of this Unity story.
Yeah.
And they're supposedly stepping up their game coverage. Maybe this is part of the little triumvirate of games covering journalists that have jumped into it. But I guess they're covering it sort of from a business news perspective.
I appreciate them covering it. It felt like really big news in our space, and it's interesting when that kind of news just leaks out into my bigger newspapers basically, and people get to hear about what we're doing in a more interesting way than just like this big game came out or like these people were jerks. Which there's a bit of these people were jerks here, but
right.
It's just nice to hear them. It's a nice like deep look into what happened over the last couple of weeks. So I think they did a good job with it.
Yeah, and I think that it was interestingly they didn't cover it like just from Unity's point of view or something like that, right? It was really I think the interesting thing about the story is that the indie developers who are really complaining about the breach of trust, about how Unity had its roots as kind of an indie engine, are emerging as the righteous heroes in the story, which is like, I guess what we would want. Right?
I mean, they literally link to an article that talks about how John Riccitiello, I don't know if you click through the link, but it goes to a Bloomberg article about how John Riccitiello is just like the most hated like person in the games industry or something, and how bad he is. And it's just like here's a link to an article about how bad the CEO of Unity is. So they're not holding back their punches.
Right, it's absolutely a fall on your face kind of story. And the thing that I think is, I feel like the way it's shaping up is basically Unity tried to make a bunch more money off of the biggest earners in the Unity space, which, tell me if you think this is right. I think it's mobile games, right? It's like free-to-play mobile games that have tons of users, are making a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean that's I think Unity makes most of their money off of their ad business, really, and not sales of games.
Right. Well, they didn't make any money before this pricing change, right? Because
they have their own, like, you can plug in Unity ads to your game.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of their business model, which basically doesn't involve like us, like the indies and AAA studios, or not that many AAA studios use Unity.
But you could buy a license if you're a AAA studio, and it's a tiny amount of money.
Yeah. It's a huge amount of money for a normal person, but for a studio, it doesn't matter, right? It's like it was something like $1,500 per seat per year, which is a lot of money for an individual, but for a company, it's a bit more money than they're paying the person who's sitting on that. It's a small increase to their salary anyway, if you're making like American salaries.
Right. So Richard Hill and those guys are clearly thinking about like just certain companies and like how can we get a piece of that action of these companies that are making a lot of money on an ongoing basis. That seems to be like what the sort of install logic is.
So to me, it felt like a bit of the discourse felt a bit weird to me, because it was just like, they're gonna like really like mess with indies, and I was just like, I've never made that kind of money on a game, right? It's like you really start paying over it when you make over $1 million per year. If you're a group of 2 or 3 people making over $1 million a year, you're good.
Right.
I think it really messes with companies that have 15 people working there, and then their game made $1 million last year, and suddenly you have to pay for 15 people, and Unity's suddenly taking a much bigger cut of your profits. So there is a middle ground, but
it's these mid-sized.
Yeah, like if you're a 2-person studio that made $1 million last year, I don't think you should feel good about giving your money to Unity, but I'm not crying for you either.
You've done a bunch of work with Us Too, the studio behind best known for Monument Valley, right?
Yeah.
Do you think, is that like the size of a studio that?
No, I think Us Too's too big.
Too big.
Right? I mean, I don't know about their finances. I was never at that level, but I can tell you. I mean, like when I released an indie game, when we made Sports Friends, I actually went back to look, being like, how much is the most we made in a year, right? And the most we made, I think one year, the game came out kind of in the middle of the year, and we were doing finances at the end of the year. But that was probably the first year we probably made like $350,000, right? Which would have put us above the $200,000 threshold, which would have led to us to then just buy Unity Pro licenses. We did not make that game in Unity, so it didn't matter. It wouldn't matter now, because the game surely is not making $200,000 a year now, right?
Yeah.
That was first year stuff. Now it's it's like just long tailing now, making a little bit every year. But we were like, Sports Friends, which is not a huge success, but like an okay doing indie game, would not meaningfully have been affected by this.
Right. So it has to be a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the thing that keeps coming up is that this is just an asshole move, right? And like, what are you going to pull next? We can't trust you. That's the refrain that's coming over and over again.
That's the scary part.
Yeah.
The thing that blows me away is that people ever trusted Unity
in the first place.
Why would you? I mean, Unity. It's not like, I'm not saying Unity is evil. They're just they're a public company. Their goal is to make as much money as possible. They're amoral by default. Right. Like morals do not get into the equation other than for bad PR.
But clearly they stepped over a line that would piss people off. It caused them a lot of bad PR. The stock market actually punished them. So it's kind of like, you're in business with Unity and they did something really stupid, and you're like, can I trust them not to do something stupid again?
No.
The answer is no. So when somebody does something corrupt, a politician or whatever, the one answer is always like, well, what do you expect? It's like corrupt people, right? But that doesn't mean maybe we shouldn't also be pissed off about it.
And the pushback really worked.
Right, and it did work in this case.
It's not like they fully pulled back, but they did go like, "Oh God, you caught us."
But let's look at the alternatives. Let's go to the next link. Another interesting thing that a few people mentioned is that Terraria, indie game company, but that Terraria, they basically made one game, and they just keep making money off of that game because it's basically 2D Minecraft.
Yeah.
Kind of better than Minecraft, I think. I was kind of addicted to it for a couple of years when it came out. But they just responded to this by being like, we're going to give tons of money to FNA and Godot as open source alternatives. It seemed to be a kind of move saying, look, let's shore up the other choices. Let's try and create a better ecosystem. Is that how did you interpret this move?
I mean, I think it's amazing of them, obviously, and I mean, in a perfect world, like Godot or something like FNA becomes the way people make games, right? That would be better. I mean, it's really hard for a company like Godot to, the thing with something like a company like Unity is that they have, I don't know, hundreds of people working there, thousands.
I mean, they can raise huge amount of investment capital in order to grow.
And they can just create so many more tools that it's really hard for competitors to create.
That's kind of the problem with Unity, right? Like it just started growing so many tools that people didn't want and that were sort of partially supported, and it became this massive unwieldy thing.
Yes, but at the same time, as someone who uses Unity, once they have said like, oh, we're gonna have the official like I was starting to make like online multiplayer stuff, and once Unity's like, this is our official online multiplayer Unity thing, I was just like, well, that's kind of nice because they might maybe like actually put money and
they might continue to
support it, and they have continued to support it so far, and it's a good tool and it's like works, and that's really expensive, right? And I would like a world in which the open source tools can say like, oh, we will now have an own, like, I don't know if Godot has an official online multiplayer tool to it, but it's really hard to keep up.
Maybe somebody will make one, right? Like,
yeah.
So I would be surprised. There seems to be a huge amount of activity around Godot. People are releasing new extensions and libraries and things like that. But then, the tricky thing about that is if there's somebody makes an online multiplayer tool, and I guess this kind of happened with Unity too, right? I'm trying to think what the equivalent is. So like there's Yarn and Fungus for Unity if you want to do visual novels, right?
Yeah.
If the developers who sort of put those out stopped supporting them completely, then it would be difficult to keep using them. You'd have to wait for something else to come around. And that's kind of the same with Godot, right? It's like people are going to extend it and then hopefully they'll keep supporting it. But I guess the hope and the reason I assume that Terraria wants to support them is in the hopes that it's more of a self-sustaining community than relying on Unity.
Yeah. Look, once again, this is the dream, and I would like a world in which Godot becomes the standard, right? Or FNA becomes the standard.
Right.
I mean, FNA is built.
Standard.
Yeah, FNA was built off of XNA, which is how I started making like programming my own games. So I'd love to go back to that and not have to use Unity. But it feels like it's this problem where like it's obviously not good for the world that we're trapped in Unity, but we're trapped in Unity. And as a developer, I know Unity has a lot of problems, but when I'm prototyping games, I like being able to just jump into Unity, right? And
it's reliable for what you want to do.
It's reliable for what I want to do. And there's this like sunk cost fallacy, which is not exactly what sunk cost fallacy means, but there's the sunk cost problem with like, so I used to be a purely XNA developer. I made, when I made Hoker, I made an XNA, and then everyone was switching over to Unity, and suddenly all my friends are programming Unity. I was like, it'd be nice to be using the same tool as everyone around me.
You can collaborate with people.
So I started doing that, and it took me a few years to get to the point that I was as comfortable in Unity as I had been in XNA.
So it's like disturbing to think, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this again.
And now it's been another like 8 years since then, and I've gotten way more comfortable, and I can just open it and do the thing I want to do. Right. And that jump is really hard, and it's terrible, right? Because now I'm like shackled myself to this corporation.
Yeah, you have the software handcuffs.
Yeah, this corporation that does not care about me, and I don't care about them. Like we're neutral towards each other, but they're really useful to me.
Right.
Right.
But let's look at the next article because this is interesting. So way back in when I think this group dates back to 2011, 2009, some around that, like early 2010s, right? When Unity was starting to get really big after you switched over, probably.
it's around that time. No,
yeah, around the same time.
I think I switched in, I want to say 2012, because I was in grad school. That's how I remember it. And I learned a bunch of Unity from Robert Yang, who used to teach here at NYU, who I went to grad school with him, and then he ended up teaching a class that I took. So so I have that memory of being like, oh man, I don't like learning Unity, but I have to do it.
Right.
And
so these folks have really sunk costs for a long time, right? The Boston Unity group. I mean, even I've heard of Bug, and I'm like not really. I'm only like a Unity developer in the loosest sense of the term, that I've like helped people debug stuff. But I've heard of
and you're
Bug.
not from Boston.
I'm not from Boston, right? But this group has been around for a long time. They did a lot of support beyond the Boston area, and they just sort of threw in the towel. They're like, you know what? We can't do it anymore. We don't trust them. So that was a little shocking to me, that even the people who are like old school diehards are like abandoning it now. Maybe this is a sign that's like the people who jumped on board back when, Robert Yang taught you to use Unity. It's a lot of people who do have more of a small independent spirit, weren't trying to be like, I'm going to build a big business around this. And maybe those are the people who are most likely to be like, you know what, I'm out of here.
Yeah, I mean, in all fairness, these won't quite affect us. It's more of, once again, if you're a solo indie, you're probably not going to make $1 million a year off of your game. It's amazing if you do, but the great majority of us are not going to do it. But still, it's this thing of like, oh, I am shackled to this corporation that might just change the terms on me I read this other article that we didn't put here about someone who actually went through all the different terms that Unity has had and trying to figure out the legality of this. And I'm just like, bless you. It's the kind of thing I might actually do someday because I'm kind of a nerd like that. But I'm not doing it about Unity right now. But probably legally change the terms, because their terms are just like, we can change the terms at any point.
Right,
what are you going to do?
It's sketch, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it's tough. But yeah, I appreciate these people, because if you think of yourself, if you're a Unity group, you're basically a support structure for this corporation, right? You're working for them for free.
Exactly.
And like, God bless the people who have been doing that, because I've used so much of their help. I've been to so many on so many forum posts that someone just decided to give help and answer a question that I normally don't ask the question because my question's been asked a million times.
Stack Exchange and these
the Stack Exchange people, but like maybe we shouldn't be working for free for Unity. Let them answer the questions.
Yeah, I don't know. It's and people are willing to do whatever it takes to make it work. But yeah, maybe you feel better about doing that for Godot, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All community supported. So yeah, and that is kind of what so many startups, especially in the software space, have run on, right? Being like, oh, let's create a community, then the community will do all this stuff for us. So you can't just throw your community under the bus.
Yeah, the amount of community around, like one of the reasons why like Unity is good to learn is because there's so much material there, right? There's the million YouTube tutorials and everything I want.
The
I can find.
Uninomicon for our arcane evil secrets. Did you ever see that?
No.
Yeah. Oh, I wonder if that's that they're starting in the top 2. Let's stop talking about Unity and go to a different game engine, Unreal, where there was some other terrible news. So Epic, which makes Unreal, was biggest Unity competitor, laid off 15%, 16%.
16, yeah.
Staff. Yeah.
Yeah, 830 people.
Right, and across lots of divisions, right? They decided to sell Bandcamp, the notorious music platform.
Yeah, they keep saying spin off. Like, what? Who did they spin?
They sold it to some kind of like music marketing company.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're spinning off Super Awesome. Like, these are all just sort of like, I don't know, Tim Sweeney's various kinds of things that are like, hey, let's get involved in this.
Yeah, why does Epic own Bandcamp? I didn't know that. I didn't know until now that Epic owned Bandcamp. So.
Yeah, so this is a bummer. I mean, they're still making most of their money off of Fortnite, where apparently a share the wealth emote was ironically released this week.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, bad irony. And a lot of people, I think particularly at Mediatonic, were laid off. There were a lot of like cool indie devs and friends of the Game Center there. The Fall Guys team.
Yeah.
So
there was some weird news around that, because I was reading on a different article earlier this week saying, that team has almost been killed, and then Epic replying being like, that's not true, but then a bunch of people who work there did get let go. So it's unclear. I think that team at least like seriously suffered from this, right?
They were laying off a lot of pretty senior people. It wasn't just sort of like, oh, like the the last in the door, first out the door kind of layoffs.
Yeah.
It seemed like pretty deep cuts. And I don't know.
How long ago did Epic buy them? Do you know?
I don't know the exact
Okay.
the time frame when they acquired Media.
Post Fall Guys, right?
It was after Fall Guys,
So it's
right?
somewhat recent because Fall Guys is from what, 5 years ago?
Right, yeah.
Now Fall Guys came out during the pandemic. I remember that. So
Oh yeah, so that was
2021. So yeah, it's a fairly recent purchase. You know what it reminds me of? Pretty meaningful New York studio, Dots, that made
Yeah.
the game Dots, 2 Dots. I worked for them
Right,
for
we
a
have
little bit.
a lot of friends of the Game Center at Dots.
Yeah.
Alumni and so
I,
forth.
I did some I was a game designer there fairly early before they got really big, for just like some contract work for a few months with them. But Take-Two bought them maybe 2
Right.
years ago
Yeah.
for I want to say $230 million, but that's just the number off the top. It's some really large amount of money, and then 2 years later just closed the studio.
Right.
And I'm just like, just don't buy the company. I mean, I know you get to keep the game that's making the money, and I'm sure Take-Two Dots is still a game you could Take-Two is making money off of, and I'm sure Fall Guys still make money for Epic, but maybe just don't buy companies if you're not going to keep the talent.
I mean, this is the really bummer part about consolidation, right? Like a few years ago, maybe not long before the pandemic, people really started seeing like, oh, there's a lot of consolidation happening in games. It happens to industries at some points economically, and the first people are like, oh, okay, is that a bad thing that these bigger companies are buying stuff? Well, you find out exactly why it's a bad thing. Like Embracer Group has bought so many game studios now, and it's not, and they started to report having money trouble, so like. They're probably going to start shutting people down. This is just like how, swaths of the game landscape basically get burnt down to a cinder, and then small companies have to build up from scratch again, sort of start a new studio, gather people together, and I don't know. Sometimes it just feels like a terrible cycle that recurs.
I mean, these companies have so much money that, buying, like 2 Dots for me felt like a very successful company that was doing well and hired a bunch of people I knew, and there were a bunch of people working there. And then Take-Two is just like, I don't know, $230 million, let's buy them. It didn't work out. Cool, because they're not as big as Zynga, the other company we have, right? Which is yes, they're not as big, they're not making Zynga money, but this consolidation, it reminds me of this other article that I just glanced over early this week, which said Capcom does not want to be bought by Microsoft. And that's such a funny article that would be like, Microsoft is buying so many companies that there's an article about how a big company isn't going to be bought by them.
Because it can really wreck you. But, a lot of people who found companies, it's like that's their dream. That's their exit strategy, right? To be like, oh, I want a giant company to buy me. Then I can just go retire. Right, but
that sounds pretty cool. As the person retires, the 3 people who get to retire.
Like, some of the early companies here in New York that were at the heart of places like this being founded were run with an idea of like, oh, actually, we just want to have a game studio that runs forever. Yeah, and that didn't work out because of the economy, right? Like you have to take investment money, or you can go bankrupt if the economy goes bad, et cetera. But that's another way to look at it. Like, what's a sustainable company where if you like making games, if you like getting to create jobs for more people to make games, then then these kind of like acquisition, shrinking layoff cycle where some people make money and retire is not the greatest.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's that situation just to defend the people who might sell their company someday, where you love making games and you like starting a company, and then suddenly you're running a 50-person company, and you're like, I am not the right person for this. I need someone else to take over, and maybe I'll make $5 million as they do that.
Right, and it used to be really hard to find people who could run mid or small sized business.
It sounds really hard.
Right, it is really hard in games. I don't know. Maybe things are a little bit better these days. So let's go quickly through some links. So even Pitchfork Media, the big music publication, noticed that Epic had sold Bandcamp. This might be bad for small music as well. And then most terrible Epic news: the creator of Hatoful Boyfriend. They basically are negligent. Epic is negligent in paying Hatoful Boyfriend royalties.
Yeah,
and this is where everyone goes, boo! How could you
you hate pigeons?
Not pay for the pigeon royalties? So it's either they're not paying her, or Hatoful Boyfriend has made no money at all in the last 2 years, which seems really, really unlikely.
Well, so she made the original one, and then Mediatonic made the PC release.
The PC, and so it's like, does that mean
they bought Mediatonic, and I guess
got all weird.
Yeah, at the very least, best case scenario, Epic is doing a bad job with their managing
keeping
things
track
badly.
of
Worst case scenario, they're being terrible people, right? But like the best case scenario is still really bad because you can't not pay royalties, right?
And so why is all this happening? Why is all this bad stuff happening? My diagnosis is go to the next link, Logan. It's because Tim Sweeney wants to have a metaverse. This is the most clear evidence for this, that there's a Holocaust museum inside of Fortnite. Once you have a Holocaust museum inside of a game mostly known for like, preteens dabbing, then you have a metaverse, right? You're like, look, we're encompassing really serious stuff as well as fun times, like we're everything in one universe. And it's basically Second Life, right? Like that's where we're used to seeing stuff like this as Second Life. And this just didn't work out, right? Like how much money has been flushed down the toilet by Mark Zuckerberg and Tim Sweeney in the pursuit of this like terrible idea that, I don't know, when Second Life came out, a whole bunch of game developers, I just remember being like, why would you want this? Like, is it really good to have like all the games just on top of each other in one universe that looks like a Neil Stephenson novel? There's not really a great reason for this. I guess maybe a giant concert with like huge glowing 3D figures. I don't know.
The giant concerts are kind of cool.
The giant concerts are sort of cool. That was like the one new thing that someone came up with since Second Life.
I mean, there is something a bit depressing about, like I'm not exactly excited about the metaverse, but it feels like Fortnite is the closest to doing it right, and it's depressing that the closest to doing this concept of metaverse right is someone who started with a game about shooting people in the face, right? That's like the starting point is shoot people.
It was a zombie game originally, right?
Yeah, but it's still like, it's like, let's have guns, and then you upgrade your gun, and then you shoot things, which is like not the most exciting fantasy in the world. And then from that's how you start the world where people live online, and that's a really depressing start. And it's just like, it's like Fortnite is doing it better than Facebook or Meta, right?
Yeah, that's hard.
Which is a low,
I guess
low bar.
Meta did spend more money.
They have legs. I mean, I guess Meta has legs.
So
now.
It's not surprising that this comes out of a game, right? Like, a lot of people were predicting, like, okay, if there's a really good game, then eventually it might be interesting. And it's not a MMO, which that's sort of interesting too.
Yeah, it seems like it would come out on MMO, right? I mean, it is a kind of massive-ish game, but it's not an MMO.
It's like people keep fumbling towards this, cyberspace fantasy, right? And nobody's figured out like how to actually make it interesting enough that people really want to spend time there. AR has been sort of promising for decades now to be like, oh, you'll do it, but you'll be walking around. I don't know. I'm getting so sick of this at this point.
I think from a business perspective, they just want to like give you the Doritos Island or whatever, right?
Right.
Exactly,
Like
in the end, it's just about like how can we advertise to people, and how can we sell skins to people, right? So
right, and when I was looking up, saying like, okay, what are people saying about the metaverse? We don't have the article in this week's roundup, but there are these like PR week, brand week articles that are still coming out about like how your brand can take advantage of Roblox. Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess Roblox maybe is doing it better than Fortnite. In terms of like success. I'm not saying.
Right. But again, it's like a specific market, right? Fortnite appealed to like some people, not to like every person, and then kids age out of it, right? Like I think that's part of why Fortnite is suffering now, is because anything that's popular with 12-year-olds then becomes popular with their 10-year-old little brother and sister.
Yeah.
And then eventually all the people who are playing it were like, okay, I'm too old for that now. And it's really, really hard to keep those things like continuing, right? So Minecraft has legs, but it's not the peak of Minecraft anymore, right?
Yeah.
Pokemon that Biagi was just talking about here, Pokemon had its peak of popularity, but it's not like the craze that every kid does anymore, right? In fact, probably a lot of Pokemon players are adults now. So I don't know. I don't think any of these things is like a magic bullet that's going to actually make the metaverse launch and like have everybody of every age and every demographic in there.
I mean,
it's a pipe dream.
But like also, do you know anyone who actually wants to be in the metaverse? Because it sounds really depressing.
Yeah, not really. I mean, most of the sort of metaverse examples, like, or even NYU Grad Alley, for those of you who remember that, like, it's just really underpopulated. All of the NFT run ones were like almost laughably.
Yeah,
like, nobody was there.
Yeah, that was just
it's completely
extra depressing
and bad. Yeah, it's the opposite of the fantasy of like in a Neil Stephenson book or in Ready Player One, where it's like everybody's there, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly the thing that can't happen, right? 'Cause,
And
like people do not all want to be in the same virtual.
I mean, the like online living is happening already. It's just like a bunch of people getting on a Discord chat with each other and like
It's small
voice
groups.
chatting. Like it's small groups. It's voice chat. It doesn't need an avatar. It's like text and voice chat and maybe video chat over small groups. And it's like it's happened. People are currently hanging out online and they don't need a character
Right.
or VR, right?
Yeah,
like
and it's difficult to get everyone in the one place. I mean, look at what happened to Twitter. That was like the simplest, most lo-fi version of having.
Was that the
everyone in one
metaverse?
place. That was actually the closest thing to the metaverse, and it was just text. And it ended up lighting itself on fire and turning to a garbage heap, also because of business reasons. All right, so maybe we can leave it there. We'll check in next week with what's going on with SAG-AFTRA and even more labor struggles. Since, big shout out to the voice actors possibly going on strike soon against the video game industry to try and keep AIs from training on their voices and replacing them. All right. Thank you so much for being here, Ramiro.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
We'll do it again at some point.
Definitely. And thanks to everybody who joined us in chat.
Thank you.
Have a good week.
Awesome. Thank you so much to Naomi and Ramiro for hosting this week's segment of The Discourse. This has been Game Center Live. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Once again, your hosts for today's segments have been Flan Falacci and Naomi Clark, and your guests were Ramiro Corbetta and Biagi Calicchia. Thanks again for watching. Our next show will be in 2 weeks on Tuesday, October 17th. Same time, same channel. And yes, thank you so much to AI Media, who is the kind folks over at AI Media who are providing live captioning for this entire season of the Game Center Live. Thanks again, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care.